Antietam National Battlefield is one of the most pristine battlefields in the National Park Service inventory. There's few places like Antietam where you can go out and behold the battlefield and see it the way it looked 150 years ago, minus the power lines, minus the heavy traffic, minus the souvenir shops, etc., etc. It's a place where you can really get into the middle of this battle and understand the nature of the terrain, the activities of the armies, and things like that. If you ever have a chance to come out to Antietam National Battlefield, I'd encourage you to do that because it is such a pristine place, and it really gives you a sense of what it was like to be here at the time of the Civil War. My name is Jim Rosebrock. I'm a volunteer at Antietam and one of the park's licensed battlefield guides. The Battle of Antietam was, in one day, the bloodiest single day in American history. 23,100 men will fall in these fields behind us. From the Pry House, we can see over 2/3 of the battlefield. And this is the reason why George McClellan selected this location for his headquarters. The modern Antietam battlefield today has about 3,000 acres of property from the North Woods to our right here to the Burnside Bridge to the south. Over 400,000 people visit the park annually, and for our 150th anniversary commemoration in September, we had over 40,000 people in the 2-week visiting period. The Battle of Antietam is considered by many to be one of the most decisive battles of the Civil War. At this battle, the first invasion of Robert E. Lee's Army in Northern Virginia is turned back by George McClellan's Army of the Potomac. The 1st Minnesota Infantry, a part of the 2nd Corps, played an important role in this battle. While often overshadowed by their climactic role at the Battle of Gettysburg 9 months later, nevertheless, the 1st Minnesotans covered themselves with glory here and were a crucial part of the 2nd Corps attack on the battlefield. In June of 1862, Robert E. Lee takes command of the Army of Northern Virginia. The South is losing the Civil War. In the West, Union armies under General Grant have captured Fort Donelson and Fort Henry. General Grant has defeated the Confederate Army at Shiloh. Admiral Farragut's captured New Orleans. Admiral Burnside has invaded the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina. And a large Federal Army under George McClellan, nearly 100,000 men, is outside of Richmond, 5 miles away. Robert E. Lee takes command of the Army of Northern Virginia, and within 3 months the pendulum has swung the other way. Now the Confederate Army is on the offensive. They have defeated the Union armies in 2 locations, at the battles of the 7 Days in front of Richmond and at the Battle of Second Manassas just 2 weeks before the Maryland campaign begins. The pendulum is swung to the other extreme at this point. Now the South is winning. There's a possibility of diplomatic recognition by the European powers, and for many reasons, Robert E. Lee decides to move across the Potomac River on September 4th, 1862, into Maryland. Why is the Maryland campaign so important? In many cases, or in many events, it is overshadowed by Gettysburg 9 months later. Yet this is the first time that the Confederates invade the North. There is much more likely a chance of success for them here. Consider at the same time that Lee is moving into Maryland, armies under Braxton Bragg and Kirby Smith are moving into Kentucky, and armies under Sterling Price and Earl Van Dorn are attempting to recapture western Tennessee and move up the Mississippi River. This is the only time in the Civil War when the Confederates are on the offensive on a 1,000-mile front, literally from Baltimore to the Mississippi River, and this is the moment where the diplomatic intervention of the British and French could possibly occur. It's not likely, but it could possibly occur. Other reasons that Lee considers moving into the North are economic reasons. The South is devastated, Virginia is devastated, and Lee needs to resupply his army. And moving into Maryland, which is relatively untouched by the war, is an opportunity for him to give the southern farmers the chance to grow their crops, get the harvests in, and be ready for the next season. But Maryland is a border state. Maryland is a state that Lee needs to tread carefully in. A lot of people consider that if Lee plays his cards right, Maryland could become a star on the Confederate flag. There are a lot of reasons for this. Maryland is ostensibly a slave state, but the slave economy is most prevalent in Baltimore and Annapolis on the Eastern Shore. Out here in Western Maryland, you don't see as many slaves. You see some, but you don't see the plantation system working like it does in Eastern Maryland. In the presidential election of 1860, Marylanders by no means voted for Abraham Lincoln, but they didn't necessarily support the secessionist candidate John Breckinridge. They were moderates, middle of the roaders, so to speak. But Southerners realized that Abraham Lincoln has essentially garrisoned Maryland like a Roman province. Consider, the writ of habeas corpus is suspended. House arrest for officials in Baltimore and Annapolis. The state legislature has been prevented from meeting. And many in the South think that this is the chance to add Maryland to the Southern cause. We don't really think about Abraham Lincoln like this 150 years later. Looking backwards over our shoulders, he's the great emancipator. But if you look at a map, you know why Abraham Lincoln is treading so heavily on the people of Maryland. And that's because if Maryland falls, Washington falls. And we have a whole new set of parameters here. So political reasons here, economic reasons, diplomatic reasons, but militarily is the main reason that Lee is in Maryland. He has licked the Union armies twice in 3 months. In the sporting parlance, he's 2-0. And if he can engineer one more victory, there's a chance here to end the war, to reach the hearts and minds of the Northern people who are tired of these terrible butcher bills, as well as the Southern people. And we're reaching for the hearts and minds. And Robert E. Lee believes that if he wins this battle, he can open negotiations for peace with the White House. On September 4th, 1862, Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia crosses the Potomac River and moves towards Frederick, Maryland. They captured the city on the 6th of September. 60 miles southeast is the Army of the Potomac under George McClellan. Consider the Army of the Potomac at this point. It's a defeated force. It's been defeated at the battles of the 7 Days. The Army of Virginia has been defeated at Second Manassas just 2 weeks before, and Abraham Lincoln needs to put somebody in charge of those defeated, demoralized forces around Washington. Additionally, thousands of new, fresh troops who were just recently brought into the Army have to be organized, outfitted, and incorporated into that Army as well. Lincoln needs an organizer. He needs a soldier that the troops can trust, that the generals will follow, and despite almost total opposition by his cabinet, the radical Republicans, Edwin Stanton, Salmon Chase, and so on, Lincoln picks McClellan and puts him back in command. And McClellan does what McClellan does best. In just a couple days, he reorganizes the Army. In a couple days, he puts the new reserves coming in from the field into the Army. He reshuffles the command structure, and he gets them moving out here towards Western Maryland. Robert E. Lee is deciding what his next step is. He can either double back towards Washington or Baltimore, or he can move into Pennsylvania. And his decision is to move into Pennsylvania. Robert E. Lee will decide that he needs to move further west towards the Potomac River in Western Maryland and then turn right and head north towards Pennsylvania. He outlines this particular mission in Special Orders 191. Special Order 191 addresses the need to capture Harper's Ferry to the south, but continue to keep the pressure on Pennsylvania to the north. So he divides his army, something Lee typically does. He sends Jackson with 6 divisions to Harper's Ferry, and he sends Longstreet to Hagerstown to keep the pressure on. This order is distributed to his officers, but a copy is left behind in Frederick, and it will be discovered on September the 13th by George McClellan's Army of the Potomac. So on September 13th, when the Army of the Potomac advances into Frederick, they will discover a copy of the Lost Order, and it will outline for George McClellan exactly what the Confederates are planning to do. And despite what a lot of people think about George McClellan, he moves relatively quickly on this order. He sends some cavalry out to confirm the veracity of the order, to make sure it's not a plant, and that afternoon the 9th Corps is on its way towards South Mountain. Lee now realizes that George McClellan has moved uncharacteristically fast, and he is in Frederick, and he threatens to get between his column near Pennsylvania under Longstreet and the column at Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry's not fallen yet. It's a moment where Robert E. Lee is considering abandoning the campaign altogether, but he's going to get word from Stonewall Jackson that the city of Harper's Ferry is about to fall, and he decides to make his stand in these hills. On the other side of the Antietam is the Sharpsburg Ridge, about 500 feet above sea level, and that's where the Confederate Army will assemble. It will gather as George McClellan's army moves into this location where we are at this point. The 1st Minnesota is part of the 2nd Corps under General Edwin Vose Sumner, an old 40-year veteran of the United States Army. He came into the Army in 1819. He fought in Mexico. He'd been out west in the Indian campaigns. He commands the largest corps in the Army of the Potomac, over 15,000 men. The 1st Minnesota is under the division of General John Sedgwick, called Uncle John by many, another West Pointer, another regular Army officer from the old Army, and they comprise the 2nd Division of the 1st Corps. The 1st Minnesota is part of General Willis Gorman's brigade. Willis Gorman was the first commander of the 1st Minnesota at the beginning of the war, but now he's moved up the chain of command and commands a brigade. And this is the organization of the 1st Minnesota and where they fall into the chain of command. There were 2 other Minnesota units here at the Battle of Antietam in addition to the 1st Minnesota Infantry Regiment. One was the 1st Company of Minnesota Sharpshooters, which was assigned to the 2nd United States Sharpshooter Regiment, and they were part of Phelps Brigade in Abner Doubleday's division in the 1st Corps. They didn't fight with the 1st Minnesota Infantry, but they were on the battlefield. They actually fought in the cornfield. The 2nd unit is the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooter Company from Minnesota, Company L, and they had been attached earlier in the campaign to the 1st Minnesota Infantry, and they will fight with the 1st Minnesota Infantry at the Battle of Antietam. I often get the visitors from Minnesota who are interested in the role of the Minnesota Infantry. Many of them know a lot about the role of the regiment at Gettysburg 9 months earlier, but they played a significant role here as well, part of the 2nd Corps. And we should remember that the 1st Minnesota Infantry was the very first regiment raised as volunteers in the Union Army in the Civil War. Governor Randall was actually in Washington when the secession crisis came to a head with the firing at Fort Sumter, and he immediately offered a regiment of volunteers from Minnesota. They came in initially as 90-day men, but they will be converted into a 3-year regiment, and they will fight until 1864. The 1st Minnesota Infantry was present at the Battle of First Manassas. The Minnesotans fought in the peninsula. They were the rear guard for the Union Army at the 2nd Manassas campaign. These are hardened veterans. They will come to this battlefield, to the Maryland campaign, with about 435 men ready for battle. So what is George McClellan's plan for conducting the Battle at Antietam? We're standing at the Pry House, and out beyond here we can see the battlefield on the other side of the Antietam Creek. Imagine an L-shaped line with the long end of the L basically facing to the west, and then the short end of the L at right angles across the creek, and that gives you an idea what the field looks like. You know about the fish hook at Gettysburg. I refer to the battlefield here as more like the long L. The short end of the L is Joe Hooker's 1st Corps and Joe Mansfield's 12th Corps. They crossed the Antietam yesterday. If this was the battlefield the 17th of September. They crossed yesterday, and they are poised already on the other side of the battlefield. The 2nd Corps is to our right, including the 1st Minnesota. The 5th Corps is out here in front of us, and then the 9th Corps is to the south at the Burnside Bridge. What's McClellan's plan? McClellan's plan is to hit the flanks of the Confederate Army. He is going to throw the first punch at daybreak, September 17, 1862, at about 5:45 in the morning. The commander of that attack is General Joseph Hooker of the 1st Corps. Fighting Joe Hooker got his nickname and his reputation in the Peninsula Campaign, and if anyone can lead off an attack on time, it's Joe Hooker. So Joe Hooker's plan is to assault from our right to our left, sweep across the Cornfield, and reach a little white building now known to history as the Dunker Church, but a building that he thought of as a schoolhouse. So punch number 1 at daybreak will be Joe Hooker's attack from right to left, from north to south, to hit the Confederate flank. What does he want to do? He wants to get Robert E. Lee to commit reserves. And after punch number 1 is thrown, he's going to order a second attack at the Burnside Bridge, punch number 2, under General Ambrose Burnside. Now that attack doesn't have a pre-scripted time to kick off. That's an on-order attack. That means you all wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you get ready to attack, but I'll tell you when to go. What's the 2nd Corps' mission? Edwin Vose Sumner's 2nd Corps is right over here. Like everybody else, they're alerted to be ready to go first thing in the morning to support either the attack to the north or to support a punch down the center, but their role is essentially first thing in the morning a supporting role. Ultimately, McClellan's plan, by hammering the Confederates on both flanks, is to cause Lee to commit his reserves. Lee has some reserves in Sharpsburg under Lafayette and McLaws. Each of his wing commanders, Longstreet and Jackson, have their reserves. And after we get them to commit their reserves, punch number 3, 5th Corps, right here, goes across and breaks through and gets to Sharpsburg. Lee is taking a major risk by fighting the battle here in Maryland, because to his back, on the other side of the Antietam Creek, is the Potomac River. And if he loses here, he could lose the entire army, and we could take the Gray Queen off the chessboard today. McClellan's plan is a fairly well-considered plan. A lot of people review and remember McClellan as a timid, cautious general, but this is a plan involving attacks on both flanks and an assault up the center. And what we also fail to realize is that the plan is working. As these heavy hammer blow attacks start to occur over here, Lee is committing his reserves. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, Lee's reserves have all been committed to the north. And when the assault happens at the Burnside Bridge, there's only 400 Georgians from Toombs Brigade there. The last card in Lee's deck is A.P. Hill's division at Harper's Ferry. They will arrive later in the afternoon and arrive in time to halt the final 9th Corps attack into Sharpsburg. So when we talk about McClellan's plan, it's a plan that almost works. It's a plan that McClellan doesn't realize is working here from his position. Now, where does the 2nd Corps fit into this, and the 1st Minnesotans? Again, as I said, the 2nd Corps is over here to the north of the Pry House, and Sumner has been ordered to stand by. Sumner's men are going to be woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning like everybody else. It's called hurry up and wait in the Army, and you will see Edwin Vose Sumner pacing nervously back and forth at the Pry House right behind us, waiting for George McClellan's decision to put his men in. Why does George McClellan put the 2nd Corps in at the time they did? At 7:30 in the morning, Joseph Hooker's 1st Corps has shot its bolt. It's faced tremendous Confederate resistance in the Cornfield. Jackson had to commit his division under John Bell Hood to stop the 1st Corps, and McClellan realizes that it's time to shove some more troops across the Antietam. So at 7:20 in the morning, Edwin Vose Sumner is ordered to move his corps forward. Sumner will move down, and the 1st Division that he will get on the road is John Sedgwick's division, which includes the 1st Minnesota Infantry. They will cross at Prize Ford, and they will be the vanguard of the 2nd Corps. Immediately behind them will be General William French's division, a brand new division only created 3 days ago with a lot of those rookie soldiers that we talked about earlier. And bringing up the rear will be Israel B. Richardson's division of veterans. The 1st Division across is John Sedgwick's division, and they will move towards the battlefield from east to west, followed by the other 2 divisions. It's 4:30 in the morning, September 17, 1862. The Second Corps is waking up. They're getting ready to cross the Antietam. We are standing at the position several hundred yards south of the ford that the Second Corps will cross when they get the orders to move at about 7:20. It's in this direction right here. James Wright is a orderly sergeant in Company F, 1st Minnesota Infantry. He's 21 years old. He will go on to write a book after the war called No More Gallant a Deed, where he records his memories of his actions in the Civil War. It's one of the best regimental histories out there. And this is what Wright has to say early in the morning on September 17th, 1862, as he's getting ready to go in. These are the thoughts of a soldier about to go into battle. After getting and distributing the extra cartridges, there was some time to wait, and we listened to the fighting across the creek above us. The fires of battle flashed up against gray, overhanging clouds and reflected back to waiting watchers, and do not start the same thoughts or stir the same feelings as a moonlit scene beside a quiet river. The angry roar of cannon echoed back from the hills, and the snarls and growls of an intermittent rifle fire rolling through the valley at the break of day is not so cheerful a greeting as the pleasant good morning of a friend. Picture the scene. Add to it the fact that you are under orders to go in. And remember that we were still human. And you may judge of our feelings that historical September morning that ushered in the bloodiest day that ever has done on the American continent. It was not a favorable time for quiet meditation. And that's what's going on in the minds of 100,000 men on this bloody day in September as they get ready to cross the creek and grapple with the enemy, north or south, from the Burnside Bridge to the Poffenberger Farm in the north. These are the thoughts of every fighting man at this battle. We're standing in the East Woods, just a little north of the position that the 1st Minnesota emerged after they'd crossed Antietam Creek. The 1st Minnesota is a regiment consisting of 10 companies. In addition to the 10 companies assigned to the regiment, the 2nd Minnesota Sharpshooters are assigned as well. The regiment is now under the command of Colonel Alfred Sully, West Pointer, class of 1841. Sully was in West Point with such famous Civil War officers as John Reynolds and Israel B. Richardson. Alfred Sully, in the early days of the Civil War, is out west fighting Indians, but he's brought east and he's given command of the 1st Minnesota. Sully had been associated with Minnesota earlier in his career when he was assigned at some of the forts up there, Fort Ridgely, Fort Snelling, and so on. What do the men think of this new colonel, Colonel Alfred Sully, who's taken command just before the bloody 7 days battle? I'll read you a couple of quotes from some of the soldiers that were here. He is evidently a fine soldier, has a good voice, and is well liked. My opinion is that he will wear well. That's from Edward Stevens. Another soldier, Jasper Searles, says, the men soon realized that they were commanded by an officer who would make no unnecessary demand on their strength or valor, and there resulted from that a mutual confidence never afterwards impaired. So Alfred Sully is a guy that the soldiers realize A, knows his business, and B, is going to take care of them. He's not going to leave them out on the battlefield. He's already distinguished himself with the command earlier in the war during the 7 days and at the rear guard at the Battle of Second Manassas. And so Sully is going to be deploying the regiment here. And essentially the way that the regiment is deployed is they're going to be deployed facing towards the west. What has happened is up until now there's been a series of attacks launched by General Joe Hooker's 1st Corps and General Joe Mansfield's 12th Corps on a more of a north-south axis. And now we're moving east and west because as Edwin Sumner comes out on the battlefield, he sees what he believes is an opportunity to swing across the battlefield and then pivot and then drive south. So the 1st Brigade in that attack is Willis Gorman. Willis Gorman is the 1st commander of the 1st Minnesota earlier in the war. The soldiers didn't like him as much as they liked Alfred Sully. They said about Gorman, he tried to show us how little we knew, how much we ought to know, and the best and quickest way to acquire it. It was drill, 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 and then drill some more, until arms and legs were weary and heads were dizzy. Despite the fact that they liked Willis Gorman whips him into shape. Willis Gorman gets him ready for the battle. and now Willis Gorman is their brigade commander. Willis Gorman has a total of 4 regiments in his brigade leading this east to west attack. On the extreme right flank is the 1st Minnesota. Next to them will be the 82nd New York. Following that is the 15th Massachusetts, and then finally the 34th New York. 4 regiments now moving from east to west. One of the things we talk about here at Antietam on Civil War regiments and their organization is this. A lot of people think that the regiments will be lined up on the battlefield, Company A, B, C, D, E, etc., from left to right or right to left. And that's not how they did it. The companies are arrayed based on the seniority of the captains. So the most senior captain will have the position of honor, the most important position on the right flank. And Captain William Colville will be on the right flank. Colville is the senior captain. In fact, he's actually been nominated for promotion to major, and he will get that promotion literally in a day or 2 after the battle. So Colville is going to be all the way over on the right with Company F. Company A is next under Captain Henry Coates from St. Paul. Company C, Captain Wilson Farrell, another company recruited out of St. Paul. And then Lieutenant Lewis Miller, Company B. Now where I'm going with this is the fact is that you put your most stalwart senior commanders on each flank. And so again, Company F is Colville, the most senior officer, and all the way down here on the left side is Captain William Russell of the sharpshooters. Russell's men are armed with Sharps rifles, some of the best technology out there. The rest of the regiment is a mixture of smoothbore and rifled muskets. But just to recap, what we have out here is Company F under Captain William Colville, Company A under Captain Henry Coates, Captain Wilson Farrell has Company C, Lieutenant Lewis Miller has Company B, Captain Nathan Messick has Company G, Captain Gustavus Holtzborn has Company K, Captain DeWitt Smith has Company D, Captain George Pomeroy has Company E, Captain Charles Adams has Company H, and Captain William Russell has the Sharpshooter Company. 10 companies on line. 1 company is what's on provost duty, which means they're pulled off the field to guard supplies or do things in the rear. That's Captain John Pell's Company I. 435 men are now lining up to move through the east woods across a cornfield into the west woods to make that swing. We've just emerged from the east woods, and over my shoulder is the west woods in the distance across from what is known as the Bloody Cornfield. I personally call it THE Cornfield. In the space of 4 hours in this field here in front of us, 8,000 casualties. That's killed, wounded, missing in 3 to 4 hours a time. The battle started at 5:30 to 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's been raging ever since then. And the 1st Minnesota Infantry is moving closer and closer to the fight. They've lined up, they've spread out, they're moving through the east woods, and now they emerge on what would have been an awesome bloody scene on the morning of the battle. Edward Walker is from Company D. Company D is in the center left of the regiment out there in the cornfield. And this is what young 23-year-old Edward Walker has to say about the fight. We advanced over the ground gained by Hooker. He had just been taken off the field wounded, and his men were exhausted. As we moved on, the dead and wounded lay thick, and fragments of regiments cheered us as we passed. Our men in Secesh lay as they fell, many begging us for a drink of water, others telling us not to tread on them, and it was difficult to march over the ground without stepping on some man. And this is what young Ed Walker remembers. I never could have believed it had I not seen it myself. Imagine what it was like. And they have not even gotten into the fight yet. They are going over what's left of the bloody remnants of the 1st Corps and the 12th Corps that are moving through this cornfield. Their objective is the West Woods. Sumner's plan is to move from east to west through the cornfield and then to swing around, making a big, large wheel, and then driving the Confederates out of Sharpsburg. And this is where the 1st Minnesota is moving through at about 9 o'clock in the morning. We're at the western edge of the cornfield. The regiment is still in a line moving towards the west, moving towards the west woods over here, and they're going to hit the Hagerstown Pike. The Hagerstown Pike is a north-south road that runs to my left towards Sharpsburg and to the right towards Hagerstown. The 1st Minnesota has encountered the fence, and this is one of the most famous fences in the Civil War. There's many pictures by Alexander Gardner of the Louisiana soldiers tangled up in this fence. It's a very moving spot for a lot of people that are out here. And the men from the 1st Minnesota remember this fence as well. James Wright from Company F, who had the extreme right company under Captain Colville, is going to be emerging from the cornfield that we just walked through right at this point, and this is what he says. While advancing, we came to a fence, which we were directed to climb. And just as we were getting over it, a man came out of the bush to the right and rear. He wore an officer's hat and a rubber coat. He warned us that the enemy was not far off. In answer to a question from our captain, he said that he was General Marcina Patrick, and a moment later he turned back and disappeared into the brushes. It was not long before things broke loose on our left. This is James Wright. The captain's Captain Colville. Marcina Patrick commands the Brigade of New Yorkers that was part of 1st Corps, Abner Doubleday's division. They've been fighting over here. And the man in the raincoat, Patrick, tells them, you better watch it because you're about to catch it. And they certainly are. Marcina Patrick, incidentally, has got a raincoat on because it rained the night before the battle. A lot of times we don't realize that weather was a factor here. It was a rainy night, it was a foggy morning, it obscured some of the vision somewhat. But nevertheless, despite or in spite of the warnings from Marcina Patrick, Captain Colville with Company F on the extreme right of the regiment is going to lead them across this fence line into the west woods. This is one of the Confederate defensive positions to the west of the 1st Minnesota Infantry. Looking over my shoulder here, you'd see where the 1st Minnesota Infantry would have been emerging from the west woods. On the left would have been the right company, because we're looking at it kind of over our shoulder, and so the regiment would have spread out right over here in front of us. Next to them is the 82nd New York, the next is the 15th Massachusetts, and then the 34th New York. Gorman's brigade is making the turn. They're beginning to make that turn, and the 2 brigades of Lafayette McLaw's division, Paul Semmes, essentially over here, William Barksdale over here, are now smashing into the left flank, and that left flank is starting to fall apart. The Confederates, though it may seem like they're in good shape, are actually pretty frantic about this attack over here. And Sam Buck from the 13th Virginia, who was not too far from where we are, describes the situation. We charged, skirmished, and then went to work assisting the horses to pull the artillery in position. Major Pelham was trying to get 2 Napoleon guns on a hill commanding their position, but the horses would not pull them over the plowed fields. And up the hill so every fellow, regardless of the shot and shell, took hold and almost carried both pieces into position. And there in front of a corps of the enemy, the gallant Pelham fought those pieces, aiming and firing each piece as fast as the men could load, while our men supported him and poured the lead into their flanks. That's Sam Buck from the 13th Virginia Infantry near this spot. We are now back in the West Woods. The situation is that the Confederate attacks have crushed the left of Gorman's brigade, and General Willis Gorman has now ordered the 1st Minnesota to swing to the right and allow Dana's brigade to start to shoot to the front. In the confusion and the tumult of battle, that order is not going to be executed exactly the way General Gorman intended. This is what Colonel Sully does, according to Edward Walker from Company D. Well, as soon as Sully saw that the left had gone, he gave the order for us to fall back. We simply about-faced, rear rank in front, and marched back through the woods, perhaps 200 yards, over a stone wall into an open field, and then about-faced. This was done in pretty good order. Some slinks, of course, run, but men generally behaved better than they did ever in any fight before. We did not go out over the same ground that we came in. And Edward Walker's exactly right. They came in from east to west this way, and now they're going from south to north. They're retreating through these series of rock ledges and fences back towards the North Woods part of the battlefield. Tom Preswell says this about Sully as well. Owing to the cool head of Sully, the 1st Minnesota was the only regiment in the division which maintained anything like organization. And when we were only about halfway up the slight rise of ground over which we were retreating, the colonel gave the order to face and fire, with the result that a solid volley from about 300 muskets poured into the following enemy and caused a quite appreciable check to their oncoming. So Sully executes a series of retreats, stops, turns around, fires, and pulls back. A delaying action, which is going to solidify the northern part of the line for the Union. He's going to back into or retreat towards General Marcina Patrick's brigade. We met General Patrick earlier as we were coming upon the Hagerstown Pike. But Sully's work, the cool head of Sully, is going to stabilize the line here on the northern part of the field. There are several commemorations that Antietam National Battlefield does every year. One is obviously the anniversary of the battle, which occurs on September 17th. This year was the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Antietam, and over 40,000 people visited the park during the 2-week visitation period. What does the commemoration of the 150th of the anniversary of the battle mean? It means that this is still an important moment in American history. It's still regarded as such. It is a turning point in the Civil War, and it's a turning point in American history, because for the first time, freedom becomes an objective of the war, and the beginning of the long road to eventual freedom for the African Americans is going to begin at this battle. Also, the service of the veterans north and south has to be remembered. The 150th anniversary commemorates that as well. Another important day is the first Saturday of December, which is the illumination. 23,100 lights, candles are installed on the battlefield. Throughout the course of our day here, you'll see examples of scouts and other volunteers from the local communities putting those lights out. And they'll be lit at sunset. And for 7 hours, those 23,100 lights will reflect the killed, wounded, and missing who gave everything 150 years ago.